I'm going to just tell you a little bit about him. He's the chair of the Equal Employment Practices Commission. That's our board. And he's currently serves as the executive vice president for the fund of the city of New York. Prior to his current role, he served as deputy borough president at the office of the Manhattan Borough President, Gail Brewer. Just to give you an idea of a little bit of his background, he has a Bachelor of Arts degree in International Relations from Colgate University, an MBA in Political Science, and an MPA in Public Policy Analysis from Binghamton University. Without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Chair Bonilla.
Thank you so much, Jane. Good morning, everyone. I know people are maybe a little bit surprised of how promptly we started at 10 a.m., not necessarily giving folks time to make it up the stairs or out of their kitchen or up the elevator, however they may be, but we wanted to be mindful and respectful of everyone's time. I can't tell you enough how excited I am to be able to have the Eepc host this symposium. A conversation among us. I feel that often in the EEO world, and many of you wear multiple hats, so the EEO hat is one of many or of a couple of hats you wear in your agency, but I desperately feel that we don't have enough opportunities to speak to one another, to gather, to discuss topical issues, and to be supportive of one another as we take on new roles or have different questions and issues around EEPC and the EEO roles and responsibilities we do. As you know, New York City is the largest municipal workforce in the country. Everything we do is large and at huge scales, right? Even our district managers who run community boards of 300,000 people, a 300,000 person community board is considered a mid-sized city in the United States. So to think of the large and scope of what we do. We have the cleanest drinking water in the country, right? Why are we not Flint, Michigan, right? Why are we not Flint, Michigan? Why aren't we Flint, Michigan? And that's the dedication and commitment of our public servants to keep our water the cleanest. Why are our rivers the cleanest and getting cleaner by the decade and bringing back marine life? That's the work of our public servants, our civil servants. The school year is concluding, right? And thank goodness for our crossing guards, right? All cars should yield to pedestrians as they're crossing the street. We know because of the fatalities of some of our children and adults, that doesn't always happen. So thank goodness for the safety provided by our crossing guards. And the list goes on and on and on. So the EEPC's mission is to make sure that all the diversity and all the talent that is in New York City has an opportunity, an equal opportunity, a fair opportunity to seek employment with the city's largest employer, which is city government, the municipal public sector. And we want to make sure that agencies are doing their best to make sure that they not only attract the best talent that New York City has to offer, but that they find the best talent in all corners of the city, right? That all corners, all boroughs, all neighborhoods, all zip codes, all elementary and public high schools and charter schools and private schools should have kind of equal footing in terms of being able to produce the kind of talent that New York City needs and desires. And once hired, we want to make sure that we treat our workforce equitably, inclusive, and that we allow for opportunities to retain talent, but also promote talent in an equitable and equal way, and that people feel satisfied with their public service, civil service career. Toward that end, the EPC audits over 143 city agencies for its policies, procedures, practices around EEO, EEPC compliance, federal, state, and city compliance. But as I've often stated in board meetings, at our EEPC board meetings, compliance is not commitment, right? Compliance is not commitment. Everyone in this meeting today, in this Teams meeting, knows that we can all check boxes. And we've done that in the past. And sometimes we've just checked boxes for the sake of checking them. But to make sure that people's experiences in the workforce, in the public sector, is one that is beyond checking boxes of compliance, but is one that reflects commitment, right? The commitment of the commissioner, the commitment of the supervisors, the directors, and the commitment of the human resource department, all the way down, from the top all the way down. So we really try to aim at commitment. When we look at commitment, in addition to our auditing functions, the EPC has a research function. And a lot of people are not aware that the executive director, Jean Victor, leads a team that is administrative, auditing, research as well. And in terms of our research, as past symposiums have highlighted, we're interested in issues of occupational segregation, right? New York City, we know, has residential segregation that's been well documented. We equally know that New York City, unfortunately, has a school system that's among some of the highly segregated school systems in the country, including school systems in the South, in the Deep South. And we also know that New York City, unfortunately, has a public sector workforce that's occupationally segregated in very real and pronounced ways in terms of its pattern of the work titles that different ethnicities and racial groups occupy. Our racial segregation has an impact on what we've all been speaking about in the last 5 to 10 years, which is pay disparity and gender pay disparity. So there's a correlation and a direct relationship between occupational segregation, right? And then pay disparities. And then when you couple that with opportunities to continue your career trajectory through promotions, that's also impacted. So our research highlights some of these patterns, tendencies, gaps, disparities in our workforce for the purposes of collectively finding solutions, right? So that's really a little synopsis. This work is led by Executive Director Jean Victor, who's charged with reviewing, evaluating, and monitoring the equal employment opportunity programs in city agencies and conducting the research of the studies I've just mentioned. Jean at different times has held leadership positions, most notably in the New Jersey Transit, where she spent the majority of her career holding various positions in leadership in the New Jersey state government. Highlights of her time there include 9 years as the New Jersey Deputy Attorney General in the Transportation Section of the Division of Law, Executive Director of Governor McGreevy's Disparity Study Commission at the New Jersey Department of State, and the Director of the EOA for the state of New Jersey, 70,000 state employees. So New Jersey, 70,000 state employees, you gotta love New Jersey. But New York City, 300,000 municipal employees, not even state. Just to give you a sense of the scale, when we get it right, it affects millions. When we get it wrong, it affects equally amount of people as well. Ms. Victor holds a BS in Civil Engineering from Polytechnic Institute of New York, now NYU's Tandon School of Engineering, and a JD from Rutgers University School of Law. Jean Victor will also introduce our Manager of Audit Unit, which is very important. We at the EPC take audits, again, beyond compliance, right? We want to go beyond checking boxes to really elevating the commitment that we show in this regard. And this division is led by Menelik Alsop, and Menelik oversees the EO program for audits, city agencies, and provides guidance to EO officers on implementing strategies to ensure adherence to EO laws and regulations. Menelik has experience as an EO officer promoting workplace diversity, conducting investigations, and providing guidance on EO policies and procedures. He's a native of New York City and a graduate of CUNY Baruch School. Before I turn it over to Jean and Menelik, I want to thank everyone in attendance. I think we have over 200 people already logged on or logging on soon enough. And I see that we have the commissioner at the highest levels of many agencies, including Commissioner Adolfo Carrion from HPD. I see we're represented by the head of NYSERS, the New York City Employee Retirement System, as well as others that we'll be acknowledging. But it's great to see the top leadership of New York City here. That shows commitment, and it's great to see all the different EO officers here, because I really feel it's long overdue for us to break down the silos and create a community of practitioners around this space so that we can all be resources to one another. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Executive Director of the EPC, Jean Victor.
Thank you, Chair Bonilla. Menelik and I will be going through a little PowerPoint on the Equal Employment Practices Commission and the audit unit. So we'll get started. This first slide, the New York City Equal Employment Practices Commission, is a slide just to, tell people that the EEPC is an independent, non-mayoral city agency or entity empowered to audit and evaluate the employment practices and procedures of city entities and their efforts to ensure fair and effective equal employment opportunity for women and people of color in the city's workforce. The duties and powers of the EEPC are set forth in Chapter 36 of the New York City Charter. As Chair Bonilla mentioned, the EEPC is comprised of an audit unit and a research unit. Next slide. I thought it was important to put the mission of the EEPC into this deck because it's important for everyone to realize what our mission actually is. The mission of the Equal Employment Practices Commission is to assist New York City government in its efforts to provide equal employment opportunities. That's it. We're going to assist the city in its efforts to provide equal employment opportunities. And how do we do this? We do this by serving as a thought leader in establishing best practices for making employment decisions, by producing research studies to inform employment policy, and by collaborating with entities to overcome challenges in creating a fair and inclusive workplace. I do want to focus on that third bullet, on specifically the words collaborating with entities. We take collaboration very seriously, and the actions that we will be taking going forward will incorporate this sense of collaboration with the things that we into the all of the things that we do. I also want to point out that we believe in good governance and transparency, and that these are also some of the values that will guide the decisions that we make as an organization. You'll see that reflected in our approach. Hopefully you see the values of fairness, equity, and integrity in everything that we do. Next slide. Menelik, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. So Jean mentioned the EPC's mission. So as mentioned before, one way in which we achieve this mission is through our audits. So the EPC is currently conducting its employment practices audit with a focus on underutilization, which we refer to as the EPA-UU, and we are in year 3 of a 4-year audit plan. So the goal of the EPA-UU is to evaluate the following components of an agency's EEO program. So we take a look at the distribution of their EEO policies and procedures. We take a look at the annual EEO plans, the EEO training for employees and EEO professionals. We look at the EEO resources available for employees and applicants with disabilities. And it also includes assessments of an agency's workforce data and recruitment and selection processes to ensure that the entity is taking action to address underutilization of people of color and women in the city's workforce. And the EPA-UU contains 20 standards divided into 8 sections. So in addition to the EPA-UU, the EPC is also conducting community board employment practices audits of the city's community boards. Some of you may be wondering why there's a separate audit for community boards. Well, unlike entities audited under the EPA-UU, community boards do not have dedicated EEO professionals and they do not administer their own EEO programs. So instead, they utilize their respective borough president's EEO office, and their EEO programs are intended to align with that of the borough president. So the goal of the community board EPA is to evaluate a community board's employment practices with consideration of its size and the structure of its EEO program. So in general, the expectation is that each community board will adopt and distribute the respective borough president's EEO related policies. They'll disseminate the contact information for the borough president's EEO professionals, and they'll cooperate and consult with the borough president's EEO office to address complaints and reasonable accommodations. We also look to see that they ensure all employees complete various EEO training. And the Community Board EPA contains 9 standards that are divided into 6 sections. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with an overview of our audit process, and then we'll take a look at the standards for both the EPA UU and the Community Board EPA and what we have found so far. So now I just want to quickly review the EPC audit process from start to finish. So it's a fairly simple and straightforward process. So first we send out initiation letters. Then next, our preliminary interview questionnaires, which we call PIQs or PICs, are distributed to an entity's principal EEO professional, often referred to as an EEO officer. And entities typically have about 3 weeks or so to provide responses and gather any documents. So once the EPC has your responses to the PIQs, then one of our EEO program analysts who's assigned to your entity will draft a preliminary determination, and a response to this determination is optional. So if you choose to respond, you will have approximately 2 weeks to do so. And then based on any of the information provided in that response, a final determination will then be issued. So at this point, your agency is required to respond to the final determination, and this is something that is mandated by the city's charter. Another thing about the final determination is that it marks the beginning of compliance monitoring. So this is the last phase of the audit, and during compliance monitoring, your agency will provide monthly updates on the status of its completion of any remaining assigned corrective actions. And then upon the conclusion of compliance monitoring, a compliance determination will be issued and the audit will be complete. So I did mention earlier that we are currently in year 3 of a 4-year audit plan. So as the 3rd year is still ongoing, this table before you shows the number of corrective actions assigned for compliance monitoring to entities that were audited as part of the 2022 and 2023 audit plans. So as you can see, there were 234 corrective actions assigned for compliance monitoring over the course of those 2 audit plan years. For further context, I'll just get into some stats about the individual years. So in the 2022 audit plan, there were 18 entities audited under the EPA UU. There were 115 corrective actions assigned for compliance monitoring, which is an average of about 6 corrective actions per entity. There was 1 entity that had no corrective actions, and there were 5 entities that had 5 or fewer corrective actions. And in the 2023 audit plan year, there were 24 entities audited under the EPA UU. There were 119 corrective actions assigned for compliance monitoring, which is an average of about 5 per entity. There were 3 entities with no corrective actions, and then 13 entities that had 5 or fewer corrective actions. So one thing I do want to note is that many of our standards have multiple elements or components. So if an entity did not meet even just one component of the standard, it would still receive a corrective action. So for example, audit standard 5, which is establish and implement an EEO training plan. If an agency, let's say, had all its staff complete sexual harassment prevention training, but only 20% complete LGBTQIA plus training, then the agency will receive a corrective action. So now that we kind of have taken a look at the EPA UU, we'll take a look at the Community Board EPA and what we found. So similar to the previous table, this table shows the number of corrective actions assigned for compliance monitoring to community boards that were audited as part of the 2022 and 2023 audit plans. So in total, there were 33 community boards audited so far, and 153 corrective actions were assigned for compliance monitoring. That is an average of about 5 corrective actions per board. There were 2 boards with no corrective actions and 11 boards that had between 1 and 3 corrective actions. So now that we've taken a overall look at how city entities and city community boards are doing overall, now we're going to talk about what we found to be some of the top issues. So as far as the EPAUU, the top issue we found was training, and in multiple aspects across a few standards. So one in particular was structured interviewing training. So what we found was that a lot of entities did not make, most of the personnel involved in recruiting and hiring, so for example, hiring managers, supervisors, etc., did not complete structured interviewing training. Another area was overall just the mandated EEO training that's required for city employees. So for example, the annual sexual harassment prevention training or biennial Everybody Matters EEO diversity and inclusion training for New York City employees and the LGBTQIA+ power of inclusion training. So we found that most agencies did not ensure that all of their staff completed the training in tune with the various cycles. So that's one area of focus. And then there was also an issue regarding relevant training for various EEO professionals. So for example, ensuring that the principal EEO professional, the deputy EEO officer, and let's say EEO investigators have investigations training, or if someone's a disability rights coordinator, ensuring that they have training on reasonable accommodations as well as training on dealing with individuals with disabilities. So one thing I do want to note that is related to training as well is that we do take a look at agencies' annual EEO plans. So we look to see that at a bare minimum, you have the mandated EEO training as part of the plan, but we also take a look to see if you are meeting the goals you outlined in your plan regarding training. So that's another area to focus on. Another top issue was related to an annual workforce review of an entity's data, workforce data to be specific. So in general, we EEO and HR, along with the agency head or their designee, should be reviewing the hires, promotions, separations, and utilization data at least annually. So oftentimes EEO may review the information quarterly, maybe with HR, but at least once per year, the agency head should be looped into that review. And what we found was that sometimes the information was not being reviewed by all parties. Another top issue was related to career counselors. So what we found is that several entities either did not designate a career counselor, but in more cases, they did not communicate to the employees annually the identity, contact information, and the guidance available from their career counselor. And another top issue in relations to the EPAUU was revolving around an applicant candidate log or tracking system. So once again, this is something that requires collaboration between EEO and HR to effectively track. So one thing I do want to note here is that this information definitely should be collected voluntarily and it should be reported in the aggregate. So the EEO office can use this data to offer guidance to HR on various recruitment strategies, especially if there's underutilization in certain job groups. And last thing I just want to note about the applicant candidate tracking is that considering individualized demographic data for employment decisions is strictly prohibited. So that's not what the goal is here, but just wanted to make sure that that's clear. In terms of the community board EPA, so we found that similarly, training was the biggest issue. So just once again, ensuring all staff had the mandated trainings. And then the second most prevalent issue was ensuring that staff were informed that they should be utilizing the borough president's EEO office to file complaints and request reasonable accommodations. So another thing we did as part of the 2022-2023 audits was we decided to do an audit survey. So we issued a survey to entities that completed the EPA-UU and the Community Board EPA in those audit plan years to get feedback and suggestions on the audit process. So I do want to just take a brief moment to thank the entities that did participate. We had over a 43% response rate, and we were able to get feedback on various parts of the audit process, including, how we collect documentation, our audit management software, as well as guidance on how our guidance was received on the implementation of various corrective actions. So putting that all together, we used our audit findings of the top issues, in addition to feedback from our survey, to determine our areas of focus. So in a broad sense, what we decided to focus on was, one, we wanted to further educate the entities we audit about our audit process, as well as find ways to streamline the audit process to make it just, no one really likes an audit, but we want to make it as painless as possible. Another area was we wanted to try and bridge the gap between being an EEO officer in theory, so what the role is and what the responsibilities are compared to in practice. So we found that there was more issues in terms of agencies figuring out how to carry out those responsibilities. And then a big goal as well was to just reduce the number of corrective actions overall. So we felt that there was just too many corrective actions, so we wanted to bring that number down. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Jean to kick off the discussion of some of the things we are working on to address these areas.
Okay, thank you, Menelik. So as Menelik mentioned, we want to move forward with a goal of 0 corrective actions. So if you look at our staffing, we've got 4 EEO program analysts. These analysts will continue to be assigned to assist the city entities with the audit. We would like to do more with them. I don't think that auditing an entity once every 4 years is enough. So we would like to start a spot check program, particularly for those agencies that have been audited in the past and that have had a significant number of corrective actions. Again, the goal is to make sure that agencies get into compliance and stay in compliance. With that goal in mind, I want to talk to you a little bit about the EEO Officers Handbook project. This project came about as a result of a number of EEO officers who were in the process of transitioning into their new role as EEO officers at the time that the EEPC came and said that we were auditing them. It became problematic because these officers were not really able to address the audit at that time because they came into the position and did not know how, where the records were. They didn't know what had been done in the past. They didn't know what it was that they were supposed to be doing. So in order to help with transitioning, I thought that perhaps a handbook might be helpful. The goal is to have a comprehensive handbook that can be distributed to and utilized by all of the city's EEO officers, but it's not going to be an EEPC project per se. It's not that the EEPC is compiling this handbook and is going to hand this over to all of the EEO officers in the city. I would really prefer if we had some volunteers who are EEO officers who could give us some guidance and talk about some of the things that would have made their transition into this role a little bit easier, or could give some guidance to new EEO officers to talk to them about how what they should look for or what it is that they should be doing to help make their lives easier. Right now, we've got about 17 volunteers. We're definitely open to having more. One of the people on my team, Imani Bowen, is spearheading this initiative, and so if you're interested, you can always reach out to Imani Bowen or myself, and we'll make sure that you get included. Again, this would be a tool to help EEO officers and reach that goal of 0 corrective actions. I want to just touch base a little bit on the third bullet, collaboration with DCAS on EEPC's audit standards. We've heard a number of complaints in the past about how DCAS and the EEPC haven't collaborated on the audit standards, and there was some confusion amongst the EEO officers as to what the standards were, because DCAS may have said one thing and the EEPC was saying another. If you think about the process in this way, that DCAS is on the front end of this entire program, and the EEPC audits the agencies to make sure that they're following the program. With that in mind, we at the EEPC and at DCAS have engaged in a number of discussions to ensure that the audit standards are known by and agreed to by all parties, and that we're in alignment with where the agency should be on the audit standards. So hopefully that won't be an issue going forward. So now I'm going to turn this back over to Menelik so that he can talk to you about the last 3 bullets in the time remaining.
Okay, so before I talk about the next bullet, just a very quick question. Have any of you been to our website? You could just react with a thumbs up if you have been. I'll just take a second to see if anyone has been to our website at all. Okay, I see. Okay.
See some thumbs.
Yeah, I see a few thumbs up. That's pretty much in line with what our website analytics show. So that brings us to the point of we are making changes to our website. So why are we doing this? So one reason is, yes, we want more engagement, but more importantly, we want to ensure our website is more useful. So there are a few changes that we are working on to try and do just that. So the first change I'll talk about is that we are going to start posting our audit standards on our website. So we're going to start with the audit standards for the current audit that we're doing, so the EPAUU. And we do have different audit types, and there are other standards associated with those audit types. So the goal is to eventually add all of the standards to the website. I do just want to note that our standards are subject to change and updates. So I say that because as laws change, there are new requirements, new protected classes, mandated trainings, etc. That will require changes to our standards. So if you visit once now, don't wait 4 years until we come around again to visit our website. Another change that we're going to do is that we'll start listing our scheduled audits on the website so that entities will know when their next audit is scheduled to take place. Once again, similar to the last point I made, this is also subject to change. So there are times when we may be required to do a follow-up audit of an agency. We're requested to do a specific audit, or if we're able to get that spot check initiative underway, that may also impact when an agency's next audit takes place. But in general, agencies will have an idea of when they'll get their next visit from the EPC. Also, just another brief note is that if you're ever trying to stay on top of what you need to be doing, so our standards are in alignment with the requirements and responsibilities defined by various city, state, federal EEO laws, as well as the citywide EEO policies. So you can always look at the citywide EEO policies for guidance and the various laws and initiatives you're made aware of. So another project that we're working on is the EPC newsletter. So just a few notes on this. So the plan is to roll that out in this coming fiscal year. So it will be happening soon. And the target audience is agency heads, EEO, and HR professionals. And we want to cover various EEO topics. So often they may be related to our standards. So we may give a breakdown on a standard and top issues we may have found, and then areas that you can make sure you're looking at to kind of not fall into some of those top issues we talked about earlier. And so the overall goal is that we want to keep everyone apprised of what we're finding. So once again, we'll highlight top issues and things and tips to kind of ensure you are not getting those corrective actions. And last but not least, so we are examining everything that we're doing. And one thing that we wanted to take a look at was our certificate of compliance. So we wanted to kind of upgrade the look, modernize it to ensure that it's compliant with accessibility guidance, make sure it's easier to read, things of that nature. And we also want to find a way to highlight the agencies that are doing a great job and have minimal to no corrective actions. And as a result of the last bullet as well, that's something that we also intend to highlight in our newsletter. So now I will turn it back over to Jean to kind of discuss what's next and to discuss next year and beyond.
Okay, thank you, Menelik. So 2025, in terms of the audits, you heard all the things that we're going to be doing. We're starting to do those things right now in 2024. We'll be doing them in 2025 as well. We expect to have more collaboration with the city entities and in terms of audits. We do expect that that as we start to implement these things, there'll be other opportunities for engagement with the agencies so that, you know, again, we work towards that goal of zero corrective action. So we want to make ourselves open to you, the agencies, to make sure that you know that we're here, that our goal is to collaborate, not to punish. Our goal is to get through the audit process because we are charged with doing the audits. It's something that we are required to do, but we want to get through them in such a way that we have some lasting change so that we're not looking at 234 corrective actions over a 2-year period. I think that's far too many, and that we get to a point where the agencies are able to do this work without a hitch, and that when EEO officers transition from one agency to another, as this happens fairly frequently, everybody knows where the agency is. We know what we have to do, and we can pick it up seamlessly and continuously move forward. So with that being said, I know we've gone a little bit over our time. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll get back to you as we, either during this presentation or after the presentation. Before I move on to the next presenter, though, I want to go back to the chair because I think he may have had another message that he wanted to give you.
Thank you, Jean. For just those who may not know, the EPC Commission itself is comprised of 5 commissioners, and the chair, which is myself, is jointly appointed by the mayor and the city council speaker. And then the mayor has 2 appointments and the council has 2 appointments. And we're joined by EPC commissioners Minoska Alcantara, Commissioner Nicole Yearwood, as well as Commissioner Ngozi Okaru, and then the EPC Vice Chair Elaine Reese. So I wanted to make sure off the offset I recognize the commissioners of the EPC. And you guys are in for a real treat in today's symposium from Dr. Beverly Taruli, Clinical Assistant Professor at NYU. So definitely I'm so excited about that presentation. And I wanted to double down on the messaging that Jean and Menelik provided in terms of the EEPC wanting and yearning to work collaboratively with you in partnership and transparency, and also noting that any kind of corrective action from the agency level is best to look at that with the urgency of a liability, or think of corrective actions as headline risk or reputational damage, not to mention other kind of effects that it can have in terms of legal. And lastly, I want to highlight and thank some of the agencies that I see around. We work closely with DCAS. I see DYCD here, ACS, CCRB, the Law Department, BOC, DIFTA, BSA, TLC, Parks, DOB, ODA, Bronx DA's Office, BIC, DCLA, FDNY, OAF. Again, NICERS and HPD are represented by their heads. We have the Commission on Civic Engagement. So as others join on, we'd like to highlight that because I think we have a great breadth of New York City's agency alphabet soup, but just wanted to recognize those agencies. Thank you, Jean.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So with that, I want to turn this over to our next presenter. William Peterson is an EEPC data scientist. He's also the lead author of the EEPC's Local Law 13 reports on underutilization of women and people of color in the city's municipal workforce. He brings over 10 years of experience in quantitative and qualitative analysis of equal employment programs. William has a master's degree in quantitative methods in the social sciences from Columbia University and a bachelor's degree in industrial and labor relations from Cornell University. We are very lucky to have William on our team. William, I turn the podium over to you.
Thank you, everyone. So good morning. As Jean said, my name is William Peterson. I am a data scientist at the EPC. And today we're going to discuss the underutilization of people of color and women in the municipal workforce of New York City. So over the next 15 minutes or so, I'll provide a quick background for this discussion, starting with how equal employment opportunity and underutilization are connected. We'll review the annual underutilization between the years of 2020 to 2023. We'll review how underutilization is influenced by hiring and separation. So those are two key points in the bookends really of the employee life cycles. And then I'll conclude with a few ideas on what we can do next to better understand and address underutilization. So let's begin. So first, some definitions. What is equal employment opportunity and what is underutilization? So equal employment opportunity, or EEO, means that all persons have the same opportunities for employment regardless of what they look like. So if everyone has the same opportunity, it is reasonable to assume that the workforce would naturally reflect the labor market. So underutilization occurs when that does not happen. It is when the proportion of women or people of color in the workforce is less than in the labor market. It's important because it's a signal of unequal treatment. It does not mean that discriminatory employment actions occurred, but let's face it, racism, sexism, and other forms of discrimination are real. Historically, and to this day, actually, race, ethnicity, gender, and sex are leading reasons for discrimination. So employers should take underutilization seriously and work to remediate it. And this would, means committing the necessary time and the necessary resources to properly investigate, understand, and address it. So a good starting point is to take a closer look at employment decisions and the practices around recruitment and retention, reviewing the dispositions or the reasons that were given to justify the hiring, promotion, or separations. So ultimately, you all know the city is an equal opportunity employer, and given the previous context, the city, you might think, should be aware of and act on the underutilization in its workforce. And fortunately, City Council did too. And in 2019, New York City Council enacted Local Law 13, and that requires the EPC to report annually on the underutilization of racial and ethnic groups in the city's municipal workforce. So we also report on the underutilization of women, despite their absence from the law. And Local Law 13 also mandates the EPC to offer recommendations, including on how to address underutilization. So the next few slides, we will look at underutilization in the municipal workforce, and we'll review some findings and recommendations from the EPC's most recent fourth Local Law 13 report. So before we begin, I must note that the municipal workforce that I'm talking about here, it excludes teachers at the Department of Education and all employees at the Health and Hospitals Corporation. These employees are under the state's jurisdiction, not the city. All right, so what is the underutilization of women and people of color in the city's workforce? So it is clearly most extreme for Black workers and then women. And it is less prevalent, but it still exists for Asian and Hispanic workers. So every demographic has underutilization. The bar chart shows this for the years 2020 through 2023. The bars of the chart show underutilization as a percent of the workforce, and the total count of the underutilized workers for each year is displayed on top of the bars. So you can see underutilization, the rate is pretty stable for race and ethnicity over time, but there was a slight decrease for women. So that is good. And the stability, it does make sense. We're talking about aggregate data here for the city as a whole, all 140 entities. Or in this subset, it's actually 75 or so. So overall trends, though, are unlikely to drastically change when we're including so many agencies. And the data affirms this. Year over year, about 85% of the job groups with underutilization, they were the same. So what this ultimately means is having underutilization and knowledge of that prior underutilization, it's a really good predictor for future underutilization. And looking ahead, we've seen the first 3 quarters of fiscal year 2024 already, and they follow a similar pattern of those prior years. So I'm assuming, the fourth quarter of 2024 is going to be about the same. So ultimately, you might recall the goal. What are we doing here? The goal of equal opportunity employers is to have a workforce that reflects the labor market. That's why we measure underutilization. So one way to influence that is through hiring. Or when the employee life cycle begins. So hiring influences underutilization because that's when people are added to the workforce. So looking back, did the hiring in 2023 reduce the underutilization at the start of the year? Unfortunately, no. Most often, hiring activity did not reduce or remediate underutilization. The figure shows this. This compares the actual new hires to the expected new hires in the job groups with racial and ethnic underutilization at the start of the year. But let's unpack it. It's kind of dense. So this figure is sort of like the MTA map where Staten Island is in a box to the corner on the side. By composing this figure this way, it shows that we can see finer detail in the 2 sections, which ultimately show how hiring impacts underutilization. So in that smaller inset graph in the top left screen, there's a point labeled DPR. There's a big orange arrow, you can't miss it. So this DPR point, this represents the laborers job group at the Department of Parks and Recreation. So at the end of 2022, there was underutilization in the laborers job group of Asians and Hispanics. So these Asians and Hispanics together, in over 2023 were 781 of the new hires in the group. So that's marked by the points placement on the vertical axis. And then for hiring, ultimately to remediate that underutilization that's present at the start of the year, we need Asians and Hispanics to be hired at a rate equal to or greater than their presence in the labor market. So that is about 30%. And that's represented by the points placement on the horizontal axis. So clearly, that did not happen. 30% of the total new hires in the laborers job group was 1,233, which is much more than the 781 hires. So in this example, the hiring of underutilized groups was much lower than the availability estimates and had the effect of preserving underutilization. So most other points on this figure, but not all of them, follow a very similar trend where hiring kind of preserved or perpetuated underutilization. So an example where hiring was about on par with the labor market is that DSNY point about in the middle of the screen around 0.200. So that's where the hiring rate was much closer to the labor market rate, but still just short by a few workers. All right, so clearly underutilized groups are not being hired where they are underutilized. So there's another way that the workforce is influenced, and that's through separations, or the workers that ultimately leave employment, marking the end of their employee life cycle. So are we retaining workers that are underutilized? So looking back, did separations activity in 2023 help remediate the underutilization at the start of the year? Unfortunately, no, it did not. Underutilized workers separated or not retained at rates greater than their workforce representation. So this was particularly an issue for women, but it was also an issue for racial and ethnic groups. So the figure here has a similar interpretation as the hiring figure before, and this figure compares the actual new hires to the expected new hires in the job groups with female underutilization at the start of the year. So here we expected underutilized workers to be retained at rates equal to or greater than their presence in the workforce in order to reduce underutilization. So that did not happen. Most of the points are below that below the diagonal line, which marks the point where separations activity and that actually occurred was equal to what was expected. So ultimately, most points are below that line, meaning underutilization was preserved from separations. So, for example, that FDNY point in the middle of the screen near the orange arrow is just below the line, and that accounts for 10 more separations than were expected, given the workforce representation and the total separations that occurred in that job group. So you'll see also further down, there's the NYCHA, DOT, DSNY points. There are actually fewer female separations than were expected, but overall, the trend is separations did not substantially reduce underutilization. So ultimately, for separations, this impact was not as substantial as the hiring impact was, but it's still an important issue that we need to monitor. All right, so clearly in 2023, both the hiring and separations activity in the underutilized groups often did not help reduce underutilization. So where do we go from here? How do we make a dent in underutilization and help the city get that workforce that it wants that reflects the labor market? So you know that's the goal of the equal employment opportunity employers, a workforce that reflects the labor market. So to get that, the city should focus on recruitment, hiring, and retention of underutilized groups where they are underutilized. So more needs to be done to understand what works, what doesn't work, and how we can expand or broaden our efforts here. We focus on recruitment and hiring because ultimately who we get to apply for the jobs to take those civil service exams influences who gets hired. The city's hiring halls that were recently started up again, those are a really promising recruitment initiative that we have, and they're definitely worthy of analysis down the road. And but we have data already that can be better leveraged to understand drivers of underutilization. So all that applicant data, every time somebody applies, that can be gleaned to understand, primarily what are the recruitment sources listed by applicants. What are successful, what are unsuccessful? How can practitioners ultimately, better leverage those and target their recruitment initiatives to try to remediate underutilization? Our colleagues actually at DCAS, they prepare a local law 14 report of 2019. Then that offers actually a really good preliminary analysis on applicant data as well for us to pair underutilization data with candidate dispositions, though, from throughout the hiring process. That would really be helpful in revealing where and why underutilized groups fall out of the applicant to hiring process. So another aspect is retention. The retention of underutilized groups, it must not be taken for granted. We need to understand employee experiences from throughout the employee life cycle, including at its very end, because employee expectations have profoundly changed since COVID. And pairing and underutilization data with the reasons employees are given for leaving, that will help us better understand those drivers of separations in those underutilized groups. So local law 130 of 2023, that will actually help us do that. That law will require entities to start conducting exit surveys and interviews starting next March. And that exit interview data should certainly be complemented with separations analyses, so included specifically the separation reasons, those dispositions, for us to get a better sense of why are folks leaving? Are they voluntarily leaving? Are they involuntarily leaving? Those could really inform some of the strategies we might want to implement for retention programs. And feedback on the employees that choose to stay, that's also really important and should be solicited to further help refine those programs, retention programs. So this really is important because, if women and people of color do not believe they have the same opportunities as white males, then, the city's going to have a harder time retaining them. And, that is really important. So to wrap it all up, for city to meaningfully reduce underutilization, a greater emphasis must be placed on recruitment, hiring, and retention in areas of underutilization. And those expanded employment initiatives I mentioned, those hiring halls, this local law 13 of 2023, these are really, really promising. And ultimately, these initiatives should be supported with adequate staff and appropriate funding to ensure their success. Because ultimately, we want, the end goal is to lessen underutilization. We want a workforce that helps the city uphold its values as an equal opportunity employer. And that specifically is to have a workforce that reflects the talented workers it serves, New York City. So thank you very much.
Thank you, William. That was great.
Yeah, you bet.
Our next set of presenters is Crystal Monge and Ivy and Nguyen. Crystal is the Chief Engagement Officer at DCAS. Crystal is responsible for providing strategic support, managing internal operations, liaising with senior staff to streamline and expedite processes, and fostering an internal culture of increased transparency and collaboration. In this role, Crystal works closely with DCAS's internal lines of service, administration, information technology, and fiscal business and management to enhance service delivery to agency employees, as well as DCAS's public-facing business units. In addition to this role, Crystal also serves as a senior advisor to the commissioner and provides insights, leads strategic projects, and offers guidance on policy matters. Crystal has been a dedicated civil servant for more than 30 years, working at the Departments of Correction, Juvenile Justice, and the Administration for Children's Services. Ivy is the Executive Director for Strategic Operations within the Commissioner's Office at DCAS. The team currently provides project management, change management, and implementation support for agency-wide projects that require cross-agency coordination. Her team is also responsible for public performance reporting, promoting data-driven decision-making, and development of analytics and metrics. She has over 15 years of experience in the local government sector, New York City, and Los Angeles, California. She has worked at the New York City Mayor's Office, New York City Small Business Services, and the New York City Department of Buildings. Crystal and Ivy, I'm turning the mic over to you guys.
Thank you, Jean. Good morning. How's everybody feeling? Thank you so much for inviting us to do this presentation. We will be presenting on a little over a year's work to get to this point. We're so happy to be here because just talking about leveraging the employee value is exactly what this project has been trying to do. The presentation on the data actually helps support what we want to do with transforming the onboarding and pre-hire experience. So let's bring up the deck. Okay, let's just go. That's what we're going to be talking about, transforming the hiring and the onboarding experience. All of you who work for the City of New York have gone through that experience where you had to fill out a bunch of paperwork, right? And then went to an orientation. Well, today we're going to talk about how we're going to change that to give it a one city feel. So can I get to the next slide? So how did we get here? We had some catalysts for change. So we had COVID, right? And we had to come back to the city, and we had some realities, which was we lost a lot of people. we had this great resignation. Government employees, right? We're fighting to get good employees. We want the best to work for the greatest city in New York. However, we had some challenges because COVID showed us that we can work from home. So we had this competition now with a lot of people wanting to work from home. I like to do my laundry. As you could see, I'm working from home at the moment. So making those adjustments in the city of New York, as it is said in my bio, I am now completing my 34th year, and I never thought that we would have telework in the city of New York. But it happened, but it took us a little time to get there. So when we came back from COVID, we didn't have it. We had to get everybody that was used to working from home to come back in. And we lost people. We lost people, parents. Some of the statistics talked about women. We lost women because they were caretakers, right? And they had other choices that they could leave to go to another job that was offering them the possibility to work from home. So we're faced with this, right? Then we have our mayor who likes to be out and about, and he listens to what people had to say. And some of the things that he heard was that, you know, to join the city of New York can be very confusing, can be very challenging, navigating the process, right? And that it takes a very long time, anywhere from 6 to 8 months to onboard somebody. When in the private sector, it could be a couple of weeks and I'm working. And that can turn people off, right? So what we looked at is that we can't just do one thing. And it was mentioned by William about the fact that we had these hiring halls. The mayor had wanted to do something to say, I want to bring the jobs out into the community, right? We want to bring it, and I think your chair had also mentioned, you know, we need to get out there, right? We need to get out and about and reach people that we don't normally reach. So that was the number one thing. But in order to attack any problem, you have to come at it from many sides. So, you know, DCAS is also responsible for all of, it was mentioned, you have to take an exam, but there are minimum qualifications. So our team is reviewing a lot of the minimum qualifications for our positions, because what we've also learned is that sometimes some positions do not need to have a college degree to do the work that we are asking. And sometimes we need to take a look. And we need to upgrade ourselves. And you don't have to say just because it's worked for 30 years that it needs to continue. We need to continue to change as times change. So that was another group that was working on that. And then there was the transformation group. So our commissioner, Dawn M. Pinnock, said we need to also tackle, as we're doing hiring halls, as we're looking at minimum qualifications for positions, we need to also look at the experience for the employee. We often say our employees are our greatest asset. But do we believe it? Because if we do, we would be making things a lot easier for them to become an employee and to stay an employee of the city of New York. So can I get to the next screen? The importance of onboarding. So here's some of our statistics. Within New York City government, over 40% of separations occur within the first 4 years of service. That hit us hard because we do a lot of work to train someone. There is a lot that goes into onboarding somebody with background investigations that we do, right? Because you're all working for the city of New York, right? So all those things that we invest in somebody just to lose them. I think we also don't really highlight the fact, as your chair said, we are over 300,000 strong, and we do have an alphabet soup of many agencies. You can leave one agency and go to the other and still have a career in the city of New York. And we do not highlight that enough, right? We can, as I often say, I have somebody will leave DCAS, I'll be a little upset, but they're gonna go maybe to ACS, right? Or they're gonna go to, you know, NYCHA. I have a cousin now in another agency, and we are one city. And that's what we were trying to create. And I think that's what the mayor has been trying to say from the beginning, is that if we aren't individual, yes, we are unique, and that what we do and how we work at an agency, but in the end, we are one city. And we need to amplify that message so people know they can build a career and do different things. You don't have to do one thing. You can go on and do the next thing and build an unbelievable career in the city. So let's get to the next screen. So, transformation. What did we do? So our boss, Dawn M. Pinnock, came to myself, came to Ivy, and said, we need to look at change. We want, and everything we're doing with this change, how is it going to fall on that job seeker, right? What is the experience? So she goes, I want a streamlined, standardized. So it doesn't matter if I go to this agency or this agency, the experience is the same. And an engaging hiring and onboarding practice that will offer increased transparency and predictability. Not like I don't know, but I'm going to know because here's the process and here's where I am in the process. A decreased cycle time, as I mentioned before, 6 to 8 months is a real long time to ask somebody to hold on, right? And an amplified one city employer image that no matter what agency you're starting at, you get that same experience when you're coming in and when you're going to be onboarded. So let's take to the next screen. As anything that happens that's good, you have to start somewhere. And this was our project timeline. So back in March of 2023, we went into phase 1, where we had a working group, and it was a sprint, a 10-week sprint. And we had to come up with recommendations of how we would decrease that pre-hire cycle time, standardized documentation, and then onboarding. And that we had to pick dates, right? So that we can also track this. So we're tracking now the date that a person is interviewed for the position until the time they are actually first day sitting in that seat, right? Getting orientation. So that was the cycle time that we were looking to track. We did meet our goal within 10 weeks, thanks to our StratOps team at DCAS to really drive this project forward. And you don't do it alone. We had over 28 partners, and there are things that we call back at DCAS. Have you volunteered or have you been voluntold? We all know what it is to be voluntold. But this was a true volunteer. At our agency personnel officers meeting, we reached out and asked those APOs if they would want to volunteer to be a part of this transformation project. And we had over 28 agencies that were a part of this. We also conducted a focus group at DCAS with our new hires that we had already onboarded to find out from them the things that really weighed on them during the orientation process and the pre-hire process, what was difficult to navigate. We had our pilot where we reached out to other agency partners and said, these are the things that we'd like you to pilot at your agency, which we'll go into a little bit later. You'll find out more. And then we had the last phase was where we said, we're ready. We're getting our APOs ready, and that was on May 16th of 2024. So you see, it was almost a year later. Harder than I thought it would be. I'll be honest. I thought it would be a lot easier, but change is difficult, and moving a city as big as we are to change all the things that we had to, the documents and legally to get things past the legal process of what we could change was harder than I thought. So we are now, this month, we've had 2 meetings already with the people who will actually be doing the work, the HR, not the leads of the APOs, but the HR generalists at an agency that will be actually onboarding somebody and going through that pre-hire process. We went through the whole presentation, the documents, And we've created, and Ivy's going to talk about this a little more, where all these documents can be found now in one location on the APO portal, the Agency Personnel Officer. We have a portal. All those documents will be there. And for new hires, they will be on a new site that OTI helped us with to create, that will be accessible to all those new hires once they get that information from HR. They're going to have all this information online, which opens up so many things. And 7.1, which is right around the corner, is our implementation citywide. Let's get to the next screen. So this is just a big shout out to all the agencies, if you can see, that volunteered to be a part of this, on how much it meant to them. We had to look at it in two different ways. So we split up the group into two groups where we had pre-hire, right? And then we had onboarding. My colleague that works at ACS, Melissa Hester, she is the DC of Administration and over HR, gladly jumped in. I think maybe at the end, she was like, wow, I didn't know what I got into, but she was great. And she led the pre-hire team. Myself, I led the onboarding team, and our StratOps team was involved in all of it as they were collecting documents, reviewing documents to put the final touches on what it would be. We had content developers. This was really work. This wasn't just thought partners, these agencies. We asked them, they got homework every week, and we asked them to go back, make the changes, bring it back to us by certain deadlines. The agencies that were a part of the adoption pilot, again, big shout out that they went back, tested it, told us what the responses were so that we can continue to move this forward and get to where we wanted it to be at the end, which is close to perfection, but everything will change as it always does. But right now we are ready for 7.1. So let's get to the next slide. Transformation deliverables. So the pre-hire deliverables was to reduce the pre-hire cycle time, streamline documentation requirements, including the comprehensive personnel document, the CPDB, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, that had not been changed in 30 years. Identify ways to improve equity and accessibility. What we found is that a lot of our documents are not accessible, right? So it's time to standardize so that we are all on the same page, allowing everybody the same access. And develop pre-hire checklists for HR staff and new hires. So again, everybody knows what's going to happen. If you're a new hire, these are the things that you need to do to be onboarded with the City of New York. And for our HR staff, not that it's different in this agency or different in that agency, but there is a standardization for all of our HR people. And then the onboarding deliverables. We talked to everybody, and what we found out is that some people had a 2-hour orientation. Some people had a 4-hour orientation. Some people had a 1-day orientation. 2 days. Because this is the only time we will have you as a new hire, right? And then everybody can't wait for you to start doing the work. Okay, now we have you, we got to fill that vacancy, and now you got to, perform. But we wanted to say, getting somebody and how that onboarding experience is. Remember the statistic? We lose people within the first 4 years. What are they feeling, right, when they come in? Are they feeling welcome? Do they feel that they're given everything that they need to know, to navigate through the City of New York and have that one city experience? We wanted to revise the new hire surveys. I know survey was mentioned, but we're also going to have new hire surveys that will follow somebody for the first so many months of their career so we can get that feedback, find out how we doing, how are you doing, and as you navigate city government, and identify ways to engage and promote ongoing learning, right? A lot of the things that someone will learn during the orientation pieces, which is we've already gotten some feedback because DCAS has been doing it for several months now, the 2-day onboarding, and the feedback that we have gotten has been tremendous in that even people who have transferred from one agency to DCAS are saying this is some of more information than I've ever received in my career about what I should know when I'm a city employee first coming in to help me, right? Know what I need to do and also navigate my career. Let's get to the next slide. So here's some of the documentation that was streamlined. So before, we had over 300 pieces of paper that were part of your pre-hire. And now we're less than 50. I'm going to tell you how we got there in a second. We had an average number of pre-hire actual documents were 16, and now we're down to 10. 10 documents with less than 50 pages. The number of days to complete the new hire paperwork, now we're less than 4, and we were more than 6 to take to do it, because look what we've condensed, right? How did we do that? We looked at the documentation and said, does this information need to be in the pre-hire before you've even started? Where we know most people just want to know, when am I going to get paid and how much am I going to get paid? Let's be real. That's what people are looking at. So why are we giving them all this other information? So we look to move some of that to orientation, because now we have 2 days and we can explain, not just give it to you, but explain what that documentation is. And the other documentation has now been moved online to our new site so that people can go and find it and read it, right? Depending on what that documentation was, that's how those decisions were made. And then the CPDB. Before, you had to report work history starting from high school. Now, for some of you, that could be easy. But for somebody else joining the system to go back and remember what you were doing in a job when you left high school can be daunting, right? You have to come up with addresses, what were you doing, contacts. We now cut that to the last 10 years of experience or greater, if that other experience greater than 10 years is required to meet the minimum qualification requirements for that particular position. All traffic violations must be disclosed. We know we have new traffic laws, right? And sometimes it doesn't say who the person is, but you get a ticket because you're going, 30 in a 25-mile-an-hour zone. So we made those things clearer now of what you need to actual report. So those camera violations do not need to be included. Appeal process was not clear, right? These are people that are maybe affected by the Fair Chance Act. Those things were really not clear when you read the CPDB and could be confusing to somebody who's trying to fill it out. We have made that very clear of what needs to be reported, what doesn't need to be reported. If you were a juvenile, what does not need to be reported, where before it was extremely confusing. Plain speak is the way we should be addressing things so that people understand what they need to provide. Instructions did not include definition and terms, even with military service definition. We expanded it. We wanted people to understand what we would accept and what that means. And before it was, we have people that serve in the Coast Guard. We have people that serve a long military career, short military career. It wasn't clear, and now it's clear. So this is just some of the things. And as I mentioned before, the CPDB had not been touched in 30 years. So that just shows you that this was really something that was needed. And now we know we have to look at it. We can't wait 30 years to look at it, that there should be a review process. So we are constantly looking and changing with how the city changes, that we change. Let's get to the next screen. So the pre-hire impact. Scaling down the CPDB is reducing the information required to be submitting. And now we have a new, less of a painful process. I remember when I started years ago, it wasn't online and they literally gave me a stack of documents and it seems daunting. Now, not as daunting, and hopefully this will help with reduce the cycle times. Agency accountability. will take on more ownership, our HR, right, for adherence to the ideal cycle times. We need the help of all of the hiring managers, because it's not always HR, but we want to work together, right? To say what's important of how, when we interview that person, getting that information back, because how does that land on that job seeker, and how that's important. And then the document reduction, just decreasing the number of those critical pre-hire documents will reduce the cycle time. So this is where we were in the pre-hire piece. We feel that we have taken it to an unbelievable point at this juncture, where the experience for the new person in red, we launch on 7/1. So in a year from now, will be interesting to look at the data and see what effect all this is happening. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Ivy Nguyen.
Thanks so much, Crystal. What I wanted to walk through with everyone is actually what is the new hire going to experience. Crystal mentioned that we did a very comprehensive overview of what a new hire is asked to provide to HR professionals. And what we saw was, before, many documents had a different experience, meaning the new hire sometimes could use an editable PDF, sometimes they had to print it. All of the documents looked and felt differently. It looked like we were over 50 different agencies working for New York City. And so what we did here was, how do we make it so that visually the impact is that we are one city, we have our respective agencies, but are working towards the same mission and upholding the mayor's agenda. So what we came up with here at DCAS is a template. And so all of our pre-hiring documents have, it evokes the New York City flag. So it has the dark blue, the orange, but it's a very clean, streamlined look. The template on the left is a standardized citywide template, which with the city seal in the background, the mayor's name, there is a place for the agency to put their name, their logo next to it, past the vertical line here. But really, you know, this is for oversight agencies. Most of the oversight documents do reside at DCAS and will be and have been provided to the APOs for use. And then, you know, what we did realize was, of course, agencies should showcase their own look and feel, branding, their own colors. So we created a template that is on the right-hand side. So that really is what you, for your agencies, can use for your internal agency-specific policies and procedures. This was our example. We put our logo on the left-hand side. Agencies have been provided with this template, so then they can use it as well, and you can put your leadership names as well. Oops. Sorry. So we have been doing a lot, but it's not all over. And so what we are working on is, as Crystal mentioned, releasing an NYC new hire webpage. So this is a webpage where you, as the HR professional, you can send to your new hires and have them review the materials, the onboarding documents that you need them to read, review, and complete before meeting with HR staff. It's broken up into two primary sections. The first section are those items that need to be completed before meeting with the HR generalist. So things like the federal forms, an oath of office, a beneficiary form, the designation form for that. And then the second segment is related to working for the city. So in general, what are the citywide policies and procedures that are going to be discussed at the two-day orientation? This website has been created so that you as a new hire can reference it before you start with the city, so you know what you're getting into, and then also a place for you to go back to. So if you had a question about what a generalist said to you about the EO policy, you can go back here. You don't have to remember the alphabet soup of city agencies acronyms. Just come here, you're a new hire, this is your landing page. We're going to release this to have some internal feedback, but we're looking, as Crystal mentioned before, 7/1 is the new hire date for release. And then on the right-hand side is a mock-up of what we're calling HireStat. So HireStat is a very fancy Excel dashboard that GCAS has put together. And what it is, it's an opportunity to help you as an agency see where you are in the process of hiring. Are you taking a long time to have your posting up, or is there anything that you can do in order to expedite the appointment process? The colors, the orange, reds, greens, that relates to the citywide average. So if you are an agency that has many red colors, that means you're on average slower than what it is for the citywide. So there's different slicers on the right-hand side. As Crystal mentioned before, we have some deeper dive meetings that were provided for agency staff to be able to use some of the materials that we've talked about, but also we're going to do the same thing here. There's slicers, there's different years that you can compare. In 2019, how was your hiring cycle versus what was it for 2023? So what were your teams doing differently? What could be done differently? So that's very exciting. And then just a few more slides. This is really, again, pushing forward the New York City one city feel. So as an employer of choice, we want to portray our professional image. This is the template that we've created for day one. Day one is available for our HR facilitators. Day one will focus on the citywide policies, procedures, and benefits. And then day two is where you as an agency can showcase what it is to be within your agency. So that's where you can highlight your mission, vision, and values. But for day one, it is an opportunity for HR staff to work through the PowerPoint deck that we have created with our content experts. This is an out-of-the-box template that you can use that has been vetted by our content experts. And it also includes, key takeaways, talking points for our facilitators. We've created videos, we have scripts for certain topics. It has been carefully and thoughtfully created. And, on this slide, really, I just took a snapshot, so you won't be able to read it too much, but, some of the highlights for day one. It's a long day. It's 9 to 5. That's our process that we've outlined. But, all the topics are important to know as a citywide public servant related to diversity and EO, COIB, DOI. We have our payroll and timekeeping topics. And then, so it starts off with, a fun icebreaker experience and ends the day with, as you can see, a snapshot of the mayor. So the mayor does a swearing in ceremony, and we have a video on that. And so we have tips on how our HR staff can help our new hires stand up, recite the swearing in, and then they're released at the end of the day after they get their agency ID. And then, we're infusing fun as well. So it's not just content after content, press play. We created a city government taboo game. This is a way to, create some team spirit within the day. That's a really fun opportunity. And for day two, again, is really agency specific. But what we did here was we wanted to give you kind of a sample of what we've done at DCAS. It's again, it's only a half a day, so it's not a full day. It starts at 9. We have a opportunity for our commissioner to come in, welcome our new hires. We want to make sure that our new hires are feeling welcomed and informed. In the rare event that our commissioner is not able to join, she has also created a pre-recorded video that showcases what DCAS does, how it's broken up. We also mentioned that we have a career counselor. We have her picture, and we have some guidelines on what will be discussed in a career counselor appointment. The day ends with a really fun and competitive game of Jeopardy, DCAS Jeopardy. And then also we've released an onboarding buddy program. So this is an informal way to support our new hires, to connect them with other current DCAS employees. We wanted to make sure, again, that our new hires felt welcomed, that they can speak to someone who's not their supervisor, to learn the ins and outs of being a DCAS employee, and also where can I get a good cup of coffee, or where are the lunch specials. So it's kind of a fun way for our new hires to interact with our agency culture. And then coming soon, as Crystal mentioned, we have proposed some touch points in a new hire's life cycle. So we have a day 2, day 30, and day 90 day surveys, and these are going under review with our labor partners. But the proposal is, after everything's been kind of negotiated and discussed, we want to make sure it goes out through the NICAPS platform. So through NICAPS, every city agency will be able to partake in this. Again, DCAS has already done this as a pilot, and hopefully this will be completed the end of summer, maybe early fall. And then we can glean some sentiments, as William had mentioned earlier. And that's what we have for HR transformation. We're happy to take questions if we have time.
Yeah, I don't know that I see any questions in the chat at this point, but if there's something, I'll flag it for you. Thank you, Ivy and Crystal. This was awesome, and thank you for being here today. Our last presenter today is Dr. Beverly Terulli. I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Terulli. She's a clinical assistant professor at New York University, leading the Human Capital Analytics and Technology Master's Degree Program. She also serves as Council Program Director for Talent Management Executives for the Conference Board, and her consulting firm, Novius Consulting LLC, works with organizations in the areas of talent management, strategic workforce planning, and people analytics. Her 37-year career spans a variety of roles in Fortune 50 companies, consulting, and academia, where she applies her broad strategic perspective on how human resources contributes to organizational outcomes. Dr. Terulli's professional interests have included diversity, talent management, employee reskilling, and workforce development. She has published in both academic and professional publications, including an article on pay equity in Workforce Solutions Review. Her recently published book, Strategic Workforce Planning, Best Practices and Emerging Directions, includes thought leadership from prominent practitioners that provide guidance on how to think about talent strategically. An industrial organizational psychologist by training and a human capital strategist, talent management professional, people analytics expert, and educator by practice. She is passionate about helping shape the practice of HR today and the HR leaders of tomorrow. Dr. Terulli is we're very, very, very happy to have her back here. She was here 2 years ago with us when I did my first symposium for the EEPC. So without further ado, I just turn the platform over to you, Dr. Terulli.
Thank you, Jean. That was a lot. So let's get started. But let me pull up my presentation. Okay. Hopefully. All right, hopefully you can see my screen. So first of all, I'm thrilled to be here. As Jean pointed out, I was presented to this group 2 years ago, and I'm thrilled to be back. And by the way, sitting through the presentations this morning was amazing. Everybody is doing fantastic work, and I'm going to be hitting on some similar themes. So I was excited to see some of the data that was presented, as well as the new onboarding program. So kudos to all that work. So today I'm going to talk about, I'm going to turn you into marketers today, right? So you probably don't think of yourself this way, but I think it's worth thinking about how we can kind of put on our marketing hat and think about how we attract people and, as William pointed out, retain people in the organization. So first, I'm going to ask you to think back. So interesting that Crystal has over 30 years in working for New York City. I'm sure some of you are relatively more new, but I want you to think back to when you applied for a job with the City of New York. And forget about the process, but what were you looking for? And why did you decide to work for the city? All right. So I'm going to ask you to respond to a quick poll. So you see on this slide, you can either use your phone to scan the QR code, or you can just go to slido.com and type in that number and answer the question, what were you looking for when you applied for a job with New York City? And you can put in multiple answers if you'd like. And as you respond, we're going to see your responses pop up on the screen, all anonymously, of course. Great, I'll give you another few seconds to respond. Okay, well, as you can see, this word cloud sort of shows what the primary drivers were for you as when you were looking for a job with New York. So job stability, work-life balance, benefits growth, job security, challenge, purpose, pension, money. And you can see, people call them different things, but those tend to be the the things that you valued that you thought the city would give you, which is fantastic because we're going to be seeing some other data that sort of supports that same thing. So one thing I want to just mention is, we're talking about the City of New York and how you attract and retain employees. But I will tell you, based on, and I always hate that when people talk about how many years I have, but I've been working for a long time in both education as well as the private sector. And I will tell you, every organization struggles with these things. So you're not alone, which doesn't make you feel better about it, but it's a very common issue. And when it comes to diverse talent, they struggle even more, right? So it's hard enough getting great employees in, but looking for great diverse talent is even more of a challenge and a constant thing that they have to keep a focus on to make an impact. So let's look at a bit of your data. You've seen this. I won't spend a lot of time on these slides, but just another way of looking at the data that William presented, for example. And this is over a 5-year time frame. I think Williams was a little bit of a shorter time frame, but you can see that it's a tale of two cities in some respects. When you look at the 4 different diversity groups here, Asians, Blacks, Hispanics, and females, where you've made a bit of progress over the 5-year time frame on Hispanics and Asians, slight decrease for Blacks, and you're about flat on women. And as William pointed out, when you start to dig into these data, you'll see that the trends look slightly different, right? So, but you see here promotions, separations, and new hires. And as William pointed out, obviously the 2 key points here are the new hires as well as the separations. I will point out, however, that in this case, one thing to keep in mind, because the trend for Asians looks a little bit different, but remember, it's a lower base rate for Asians, slightly higher for Hispanics. So you're starting at a lower overall employment rate for those 2 groups versus Blacks and females. But the trends are interesting. The 2021 timeframe, obviously, during the pandemic, you'll see a number of more separations and some differences in promotions. But generally, the trends are showing what you're really seeing in terms of those endpoints. So, oops, this build was supposed to happen differently, but my insights here are, an improvement in your overall representation for Hispanics, and that was driven primarily by slightly higher hiring rates than separation rates. So if you looked at those slides, you would see that, you've got slightly better hiring there. For Asians, the hiring rates actually exceeded the separation rates in every year, and that accounts for why you're seeing, at the end of that 5 years, a higher utilization. And then for Blacks and females, the problem that you've got there is the separation rates exceed the hiring rates in some years and are consistently high across the board. And we call this when we're looking at workforce planning, for example, talent flow analysis. And it's very important because, as William pointed out, you got to have higher rates of hiring and lower rates of separations, obviously, to make any progress through the years. But if you look at it from a very high level, and again, these data do exclude, you'll see on the previous page here, it's sort of at the bottom of the page there, it does not include Department of Education teachers or health and hospitals. But these data may look different for your specific agency or department, but when you look at it for New York City overall, they show definite trends. So let's look externally at what the data tells us. These data are from an organization called Mission Square Research Institute that focuses on public sector and why, and some of the research as to what workers are looking for. So in their surveys, and this was probably done in 2022, early 2023, what attracted people to public service work is, not surprisingly, job security. And we saw that in your responses also, that was a top reason why you were interested in working for the city. Personal satisfaction from the job. I saw a lot of folks saying purpose or something that's consistent with my values, and certainly retirement benefits. And that makes a heck of a lot of sense because, having worked in the private sector for most of my career, these are not available generally any longer in the private sector, right? So companies in the last 30 years or so have gone from defined benefits plan to defined contribution plans, like 401ks. And so, if you're interested in that type of benefit, then you're going to look for places like the public sector that still offer those. So interestingly, these are data not from that same organization, but from McKinsey about what influences retention among public sector workers. And the reasons for staying, the top reason there is compensation. And you might think, well, salary-wise, I don't make as much as maybe I could make in the private sector. But I think you need to think of that compensation response there as total compensation, meaning your pay, your benefits, your retirement, et cetera. So that is one reason for staying. That's the primary reason. But look at the second one, meaningful work. So very consistent with what you said. And interestingly, the third one was workplace flexibility. And as Crystal pointed out, that one probably would not have shown up prior to the pandemic. But as a result of the pandemic, all organizations have figured out how to navigate workforce flexibility that their employees are really looking for. So I think that's a very interesting result in this particular survey. And the reasons for leaving, the top reason was career development. So I loved when, Crystal and Ivy were talking about the fact that, perhaps people can move between agencies and departments in New York City. And, the question I would have, as you'll see as we go through this presentation, is, are you talking about that? And are you emphasizing that? Because if people are leaving for that reason, that could be a reason for them to stay if you do it well. Secondly is leadership. With this one, I'm not really sure whether they were talking about their immediate leadership, like their managers. Oftentimes in the private sector, we see that to be true, that a bad manager can really influence people's propensity to stay with the organization. And compensation on this one is really focusing more on the salary, right? So if you're just looking at short-term benefits, then you might be looking elsewhere other than the public sector. So one question you might be asking is, beyond what you've been doing, how do you improve outcomes and hiring outcomes, retention outcomes? So what I want to talk about is the concept of employee value proposition. Maybe not new to you, but it is something I think that many of us don't really spend a lot of time thinking about as we go through our day-to-day jobs. And one of the things I loved about what Commissioner Bonilla said was compliance is not commitment. So because all of you are focused a lot on compliance, that is part of your job, I think the other side of the coin is to think about how do we go beyond just compliance and try to get a focus on how do we sell New York City? And that's really what the employee value proposition and employer branding is about. So what do we mean by employee value proposition? Well, it's pretty simple. So it's everything of value that an employer has to offer its employees. So that's a pretty broad thing, right? So what might that include? So here are some sample employee value proposition attributes. Not surprisingly, rewards. So all of those things that go into the calculus that every employee makes about what am I going to get, right? We all work for money, or we wouldn't be working probably. We'd be doing volunteer work, but also the opportunity. So do I have an opportunity to develop my skills, and what's my career growth opportunities and rate? Is it a meritocracy, and how is that manifested? And of course, stability, right? And that became, that showed up in your survey as one of the top EVP attributes about working for the city. The organizational prestige, or how much empowerment I get. How does it handle diversity, equity, and inclusion? For some people, ESG might be important, environmental and social responsibility aspects. Do I get respect? Do I like working for a big organization? Is it an ethical place to work? And does it take reasonable risks? One of the things I used to hear often about talking about why people like to work where they work is the people they work with, the camaraderie, the collegial work environment, the manager quality, your coworker quality, how people are managed, and senior leader reputation. And one thing I will say is in this hybrid work environment, this is a little more challenging because people are not in the office together as much as they used to be. And all organizations are trying to figure out how do we get people to feel cohesive in this hybrid work environment. And then, of course, the work itself. So is it interesting work? Is it innovative work? Does it include travel? Does it align with what I'm interested in doing? Do I feel like I'm making an impact? And we saw that again in your survey of making a difference. That's really important to folks. Locational, flexible work, whether I'm getting recognition, how is the commute? And as a former commuter myself, who used to drive 130 miles a day to get to my job, that can be a big thing, right? That could be a positive or a negative. And work-life balance, which again showed up in your survey. So these are kinds of things that we think about when we're thinking about these EVP attributes. And how do employees think about them? This might be a helpful heuristic to think about in terms of how people experience the EVP. They experience it on an individual level, like what does it mean for me personally? as well as on a collective level, and also in the short and long term. So you see those attributes that I just described kind of fit into these boxes. So on an individual short-term basis, I might be very focused on those material offerings, whether it's money or work location, or what does the physical office space look like, et cetera. And then on the individual level for the long term, I might be looking at how can I grow and develop in the role. On the collective side, in the short term, I might be looking for how do I fit in? How do I feel like, do I feel a sense of community with my coworkers? And in the long term, if I stay here, will I achieve that meaning for myself and the purpose for which I feel like I'm working, right? And, you know, is it consistent with how the organization describes itself as being in the business of? So that's EVP. Let's set that aside, because a lot of people confuse EVP and employer branding, and they are related, but they're not one and the same. So think about EVP as sort of these intrinsic attributes that you as an organization provide to people. And then employer branding is the activity, if you will, that you undertake to operationalize your EVP. So again, let's start out with a definition. This is a little bit longer, but it's a set of attributes and qualities that sometimes are intangible that make an organization distinctive, promises a particular kind of employment experience, and appeals to those people who will thrive and perform best in its culture, right? So you want people like that, right? You don't want to attract and try to retain people who will not thrive and certainly will not perform well in your organization. So let's look at how these two things are related. So this is a model. Many years ago, I was doing research in this area for my job, and I kept wondering, how does our brand, and I was working for a consumer products company, which has some well-known brands that you probably know, maybe even love, like Doritos and Cheetos, and Pepsi and Gatorade and those sorts of things. But I was wondering, how do our brands actually influence how attractive we are as an employer? So I went out and did a little bit of research and found this model. And by the way, that red box at the bottom that says EVP was not in the original model. I added that for my purposes. But what I loved about this model was it sort of crystallized for me how to think about your organization level brand as well as your product level brand. And you might be saying to me, well, you know, Beverly, we don't have a product level brand. We don't have products, but you kind of do, right? So if you think about the organizational level brand, you're thinking about New York City, right? That's your organizational level brand. And your particular agency may be your product level brand. There's maybe something very specific. If you're working for the fire department, or you're working for the police department, or you're working for DCAS, those all have sort of aspects to them that are slightly different, even though it's all under New York City. And what I would argue is there's also this thing called EVP that could be specific to your specific division or agency, but there also could be things about it at the organizational level. And you can see all of these things sort of impact employer brand. And why is employer brand important is because it influences how aware people are of you as an employer, how attractive you are to them as an employer, and what they perceive in their heads. What do they think it would be like to work for you, right? What are those perceived job attributes? And all of those things go into the employer brand and in influence intention to apply for your job. So I just offer this up as sort of a way to be thinking about how all of these things hang together, and perhaps how to go beyond compliance to start being a better marketer for New York City jobs. So along the way this morning, we heard a little bit about employee life cycle, but because we tend to think about employer branding and employee value proposition when we're talking about hiring, I want to encourage you to think about it from the entire life cycle perspective, and that's what we're going to talk about now. So there are various models, but this is basically, a pretty basic employee life cycle. It goes all the way from attracting all the way through separating. But I'm going to add one in here for you, and that is alumni relations. Probably not something you think about a lot, but nor do most employers. There are a few who do, but it's something to be thinking about, and we'll talk a little bit about each one of these things and how you should be thinking about EVP and employer branding in each aspect of the employee life cycle. So I'll cycle through these pretty quickly, and I'm going to position them as a series of questions to you. As when you're thinking about attraction or developing people, how are you thinking about it from a EVP perspective? So let's start with attracting. So my first question to you would be, are potential candidates even aware of us? So remember that model, right, on your employer brand. Where are people? Where are they finding us? Do they think about us as an employer when they're considering where to work? And how do we improve their awareness? Where do they learn about us and our jobs? Are you really familiar with where these jobs are advertised, if they are advertised? And even more so, do you know anything about how effective those advertisements are? Those sources for advertisement. And what do you know what candidates, potential candidates, know about working for New York City? Do you have any idea of what they're thinking about working for New York City? Because according to LinkedIn, 55% of job seekers will stop applying for a job in an organization that has negative reviews. So that's a pretty big number of 55%. So let's talk about that for a second. So you're all pretty familiar with Glassdoor, I suspect. Maybe you've even been there, maybe you've even written a review. But of course, Glassdoor is one of many of these types of sites. Indeed is another. There are probably a million of them by now, but Glassdoor was one of the originals. And what I did was took the liberty of just going and seeing what would it be like to work for the city of New York if I was interested in what it would be like. Again, this is for the overall city, not for your particular agency or department. And you can see here, reviews are not bad, 3.6 out of 5. 68% would recommend it to a friend. And of course, you can drill down on any of these topics around salaries or interviews, et cetera. So the people who respond to these are both current employees as well as job candidates. But let's do a little bit of more digging in here because people write comments. And so when you look at the top review highlights by pros and cons, what you see here is what people tend to say, the top things that they say. Great benefits, great for people who want to raise their hand and try new projects. There's always something that's interesting but under-resourced. A great pension, job security, great for family planning, good work-life balance, right? So those are all the fantastic things that people say about working for the city of New York. The cons are pay is low, low salaries, hours are long, poor management, a supervisor who is helpful. And by the way, I did not pull these specifically. These were literally the top ones that were pulled by Glassdoor based on what people were saying. So you can see that, this sort of reflects what employees are thinking in terms of what your value proposition or potential employees are saying about what your employer value proposition might be, or what your brand might be, actually. So let's talk about recruiting. So what is the initial contact with a job candidate like? First of all, what is your initial contact with a job candidate? Do you consider the first contact to be the interview? I would suggest that the first contact is maybe your job descriptions, right? And I think, one of the things Crystal was talking about was that some of the job descriptions hadn't been updated in 30 years, right? And she was referring specifically to whether they require a college degree. But also in my experience, this is not uncommon. Organizations in general don't spend a lot of time thinking about their job descriptions. But if you go on LinkedIn and look at the job descriptions for the city of New York, or any company really, what you'll find oftentimes is they're not particularly compelling as a marketing tool. And I understand there are certain legal requirements that need to be in job descriptions, particularly for public service jobs. But you also need to be thinking about, what does the candidate think about when they read the job description? One of my pet peeves, I used to see this where I worked all the time, was job descriptions that used acronyms that only someone in the company would be familiar with. And that's kind of wrong, right? Because the person who is applying for a job in your organization is not going to be aware of those. Another thing that was a common practice was using, particularly in tech kinds of jobs years ago, was, using words like, technical ninja and things. And one of the things we realized was that certain types of words that are used in your job descriptions tend to be more attractive to men versus women, for example, or whites versus other groups, people of color. So you need to be just thinking about what is that initial contact with your organization like. Do you have a feel for the entire candidate experience, right? So we heard a little bit about the cycle times for, going through and hiring people and getting them through the orientation and onboarding process. But, and it's great that you're going to be having surveys on these things. But, one of the things I hear from my students, so my students, finish with our master's program, they're out looking for jobs. And first of all, they submit their resume for a job and then never hear anything, right? And that's just the state of the world today, because most organizations are using these applicant tracking systems. They're using some sort of machine learning and AI to sort of scan through the resumes to see what fits based on the job description. And they don't have time to respond to all the candidates, but that can be a negative, right? So just thinking about what is it, even if it's an automated response, could be better than no response at all. And then my question is, are you only assessing during this recruiting phase, or are you selling too? Remember, part of this is talking about being a better marketer. What if you know what your EVP is, and you kind of do, right? You actually articulated some of it when I did the little poll at the beginning. Are you selling some of those things as you're taking people through the recruitment process? When we onboard, do new employees how do they feel when they first join? And I think Crystal mentioned that, how included do they feel? Do they feel like they're part of an organization that is welcoming to them? Are you doing things that make them feel included? Are you actively doing that? Fantastic. That buddy program that DCAS was mentioning is one good way to do that. Do they have somebody who they can sort of ask those dumb questions to? I remember when I first joined the organization that I last worked in before NYU, they gave me a buddy, and this was just somebody I went to lunch with on occasion, and I could call her up and ask, the dumb questions that I didn't want to ask my supervisor. So these are all kinds of activities that can make people feel really included. And are you facilitating their integration into the organization so that they become proficient? So beyond that 2-day orientation program, because I think of onboarding as kind of a long process. I mean, it could be, and I think you sort of alluded to that earlier, 2 to 6 months, right, before somebody is kind of fully integrated into the organization. But if you can shrink that time to where they're becoming proficient much sooner, it's better for them, right? They develop a sense of, I'm pretty good at this, this feeling of self-efficacy, and you benefit because they're going to be more productive sooner. In terms of developing them, right? So now you've got the employee on board. Do they get skill building opportunities? And are managers actively talking to employees about building skills? And those could be formal training. Doesn't have to be, though. It could be just job assignments or being part of a special project. Are employment decisions, including promotions, seen as fair, and are employees clear about how they get them? And, I know you all think about fairness a lot because of your jobs. But the other piece is, do we tell employees, are we clear on how employees are getting promotions? In some cases, because of some of your jobs are civil service jobs, they're pretty clear, right? They're pretty well set out. But in other cases, they may not be. And are we explaining to our employees how those decisions are being made? And then are managers having regular conversations with their employees to understand their needs? If managers aren't having conversations to say, hey, how are you doing? Are you getting sort of skill building opportunities? Maybe where would you like to go next as a job? That's a miss. And then retaining. So questions, do managers know how engaged their employees are? I'm not sure actually whether you do regular engagement surveys. Many companies do. and other organizations do. And they used to do them on these long cycles. So every 2 years, they do these big engagement surveys. But the trend, of course, now is more to what they call pulse surveys. So you're doing shorter surveys, doing to maybe a randomly selected group every maybe 6 months or so. And those are good ways to keep up with how your employees are feeling about things. And I love this term re-recruiting. So are you consistently, I should say, re-recruiting your employees? And what I mean by that is we think about selling when we're hiring people, but we don't necessarily think about selling once our employees are on board. And so again, that's where that EVP comes in throughout the life cycle. If you know what you're offering people, even though they kind of know it, are you talking about it? Are you talking about the great benefits that you have? Are you talking about the stability? Are you talking about growth opportunities and purpose to your employees all the time so that it's always top of mind for them? And lastly, are you even aware of employees, what our employees are saying, or recruits on sites like Glassdoor or Indeed? Are you even asking people or encouraging people to do reviews on these sites? That people will look, right? Candidates will look to see what others are saying about that. And so, retention, remember, is not all about money. We tend to think it is. Most organizations think, oh, if I can just pay people more, they're more likely to stay. But actually, that's not quite true. And in my analytics work, in my previous job, we found actually money was never retentive, with one exception. But other things were. And it's interesting that that about 40% of your separations occur in the first 4 years of service. That doesn't surprise me. In my analysis of data, we actually found it to be even less. So it was something around, and I don't remember the exact number, but the vast majority of them occurred within 2 years of joining the organization, because that's typically when people sort of figure out whether it's a fit for them or not. And according to LinkedIn, about 58% of employees say recognition is how organizations can improve employee engagement. So if you're doing that sort of thing, and recognition can take the form of kind of, formal recognitions of plaques or other types of certificates, or it could just be maybe getting together every once in a while and just recognizing the good work that people are doing. But these things are important to employees. And separating. All right. So when people decide to leave, now I'm talking primarily here about voluntary separations, but even involuntary separations. How are those resigning employees being treated? Are you celebrating their time with the city, or are they just kind of leaving without a lot of recognition of the work that they contributed? Do you conduct useful exit interviews to understand the reasons for leaving? As Crystal and Ivy talked about, they're going to be instituting these exit interviews, which will give you some data about that. Realizing that exit interviews aren't perfect. People don't always tell you the truth, but it's better than nothing, and you'll get some trend data from those exit interviews. And what do you think, or what do you know are their lasting impressions of working with you? Because of course, one of the things we know is that people talk. And if they have a bad experience as they're leaving the organization, they're probably not going to be saying great things about working for the city. And maybe they're even the ones that are going on to Glassdoor or Indeed and writing those reviews. And lastly, I'll talk about alumni. So do you even know who your alumni in good standing are? So what do I mean by that? The people who've left your organization that you would rehire in a minute. Do you keep track of those folks? My guess is no, because most organizations do not. There are a few organizations that do this well, and they're primarily consulting firms. So as an example, I worked for Accenture for about 13 years, and I'm part of their alumni network. They still send me emails. They still invite me to various events that they have. And you may not want to go that far, but it's good to know who they are, because you might want to attract them back. People leave and they realize, oh, I made a mistake, perhaps. Like, really, I wanted to go into the private sector, but it's really not my thing. I wouldn't mind coming back. So you can, help get people back in the door that way. And do you have a mechanism to keep former employees connected to you? Even just an email list, to send out every once in a while to keep them top of mind for you. And of course, Do you proactively reach out to them to return to the organization or even to ask for referrals? And in particular, you know, since we're talking about diversity, particularly these things are true for your diverse employees or former employees. So a few key takeaways here that I will leave you with. So first, what I would say is if you haven't thought about your EVP formally, it's probably worth thinking about or developing your EVP. If it already exists somewhere written down, that's great. But also, particularly as it relates to your diverse groups. So, you know, women, for example, might be looking for different things than men. You know, women, as was pointed out, are often caretakers, or they may have small children. They need more flexible schedules, whatever it is. But knowing what you are offering to these folks that is of value to them is really important to know and to articulate. And use it to develop your employment brand. Again, you might not be thinking about, you know, yourself as a marketer, but you need to be at least have a little bit of that mindset in addition to the compliance mindset. And I'm not, and when I say you, I don't necessarily mean you as EEO officers, but also, you know, the HR business partners. And then apply the EVP throughout the employee life cycle. And to do this, you're going to need not just the HR business partners, but also, you know, the managers of your agencies to really understand how to re-recruit people. So I offer these up just as sort of things above and beyond what you currently do that you might want to think about in terms of improving some of those representation numbers as you go forward. So because I want to make sure that we have some time here at the end, I'll leave you with this. So again, I hark back to what the commissioner said about being, you know, committed. And, you know, great quote here from Mahatma Gandhi about action expresses priorities, right? So what people do indicates what they find most important. So we're going to leave you today with an exercise, and I don't know if we'll have all the time because I know we're running short a bit, but I do want you to do some talking. You've been sitting here listening to a lot of folks, a lot of great things, but I would like you to really think about how you can take what I just talked about in terms of, you know, the areas of the employee life cycle and pick one thing, one area. Maybe it's recruiting, maybe it's retention, maybe it's development. That if you acted on it will yield the best outcome, right? So of all those, you know, areas of the employee life cycle, and then think about two things that you and your partners, whether they're HR business partners or managers in your agencies, can do to improve the outcomes for your utilization. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and ask, sorry, let me just get out of here, ask Suat to create some breakout sessions. And so again, pick one of the areas in the life cycle and just talk about, you know, I'd like to really focus on this area. And here are two things I think we can do a little bit differently that would help us, you know, for example, you know, do better with Black representation or women. And we'll give you, Jean, I'm just going to check in with you on times, maybe 10 minutes, and then we'll come back for 5. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Just give us a second to create those breakout sessions. You'll be randomly assigned. And by the way, I'm going to ask when we come back to have 1 or 2 folks just share some of the thoughts that they had. So keep that in mind. I'll ask for volunteers at the end.
So what are you getting this?
He's working on it.
I hope so.
Here we go.
So you're in the same room with Dr. Cerulli and her mic is muted. Can you unmute that? Okay, so what's closing all the rooms?
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'll just kind of make a closing sort of statement instead of having them read out, because I want to be cognizant of time.
Okay, I think everyone's back.
Great. Well, hopefully you had some conversation about that. In the interest of time, I will not ask anyone to report back and share what you discussed, but hopefully you will take that forward. I'd really, my encouragement is to just think out of the box a little bit as to how you can apply some of these things. And hopefully in 2 years when I'm back, you'll have much greater numbers. So I'm going to hand it back to Jean. Nice to see you all today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tooley. This was just so informative. Just really, really appreciate it. Thank you. So before we close, I'm going to turn this back over to one of our commissioners. I just want to mention that some of the people behind the scenes who made this possible, Dr. Cerulli talked about acknowledging employees. I want to make sure I acknowledge employees. Suat Albayrak, Imani Bowen, Russell Ferry, the audit team, Nika DeCall, Darrell Mitchell, Logan Pace, and Tanisha Springer, and also Pratima Dunoth and Mike Pinckney. That's our team. All right, it's almost 12:30. I just want to see if is Nicole, Commissioner Yearwood on? Is the chair still on? So I think we lost them along the way. No, Commissioner Yearwood is on. I see your name on there on the list of participants,
Yes,
Commissioner.
hi, I'm here.
Okay, Commissioner, did you want to just close us out?
Oh, sure, sure. Thank you. I saw that we were in groups for a few minutes, so sure, I'll close us out. So I'd say good afternoon on behalf of the Board of Commissioners, Chairman Bonilla, myself, Commissioner O'Carroll, Vice Chair Reese, and Commissioner Alcantara. I just want to say thank you all for participating today in this event. I want to thank our presenters. While I was in and out of work also, it was still fantastic to kind of get some of the information that you all shared. I'm going to be sure to listen to the recording. And again, thank you, Jean, for facilitating, and our team of staff that work on this day in and day out. Thank you all so very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for participating, and thank all the participants for taking time out of their day. Have a good day. Bye-bye.